Hello everybody and welcome to the third video in this React tutorial for beginners. In this video, I'm going to be covering components and JSX, so let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing we need to discuss is what a component is. Well, a component is really an aspect of your user interface. Now, components in React are reusable. This is one of the reasons why people love React, because you have these really nice kind of streamlined components that are flexible, dynamic, and are reusable in many different areas of your application. And there's actually an entire component library, entire component libraries that are built by people that contain just nice components that look nice on the screen, have some good functionality, and that you can use with your React application. For example, if you ever went and worked at, Shopify or Spotify or Facebook or whatever, some place where they use React, you would see that they probably have their own component library of all of these different reusable components, and you can use those to build different parts of whatever new user interface it is that you're going to go ahead and build. Regardless, how do we create a component? What does a component look like? Let's go through all of that. So here I'm in my app.js file, and this is our first component. If you hover over this here, you can see it's a JSX element. That's what it returns. And whenever you have something returning a JSX element in React by default, that's going to be known as a functional component. Now there's two ways to create components. One way is using functions like this. Another way is using classes. I will show you the class way in a minute. Regardless, since we are returning a div here, inside of the div we have some content, whatever, this is considered a component. However, if I go ahead and make a function, and I say function, and we just call this, foo, this is not a component. I could return some string hello, and this would work just like any other normal function would work. This is not a component because, well, I'm not returning a JSX element, which is this kind of div here. We'll get into JSX at the end because there's some special syntax that I can show you, but for now, kind of assume that JSX is just your vanilla HTML with a few additions. All right. So anyways, let me show you how we can make our own component, and then hopefully this will kind of illustrate how they work. So I'm going to say function, and let's just make a, let's say info component. These are all going to be kind of silly examples for now, just to illustrate what a component actually is. Now from this component, what I'm going to do is return, and actually I will return in parentheses here a div. And then what I will do is have an h1 tag inside of this div. So I'll say h1 and the h1 tag, and I will say inventory system, whatever, okay? And then after this, I'm going to put a p tag here, and for the p tag, I am going to say manage your stuff. Okay, really straightforward. We don't need to do anything much more than that. Now we have created an info component. Now, just note here that whenever you are trying to return kind of HTML or JSX from a component, it needs to have one parent element. So here, if I remove this div and I try to just return my h1 and my p, we're going to get an issue. The reason for this is these are two separate components. They're not one. So now if I do the div, I'm kind of returning this one div component, if you want to call it that, that has two children inside of it. So I'm kind of wrapping the two children so that this actually works. So just keep that in mind. If you're getting errors with that, make sure you have kind of one top level or parent element for all of the stuff that's being returned. All right, so now I'll show you how we use this info component. So if I go inside of app now, what I can do is I can actually just render info like that. This is how you use a component. You just write out the name of it, put it in angle brackets, and then close the component like that. You also can just do it like that with a slash. You don't need to have two separate tags. And so now you can see we get inventory management or inventory system, and it says manage your stuff. Now, the great thing about components is you can use them multiple times, right? So I can just put another one here and then it shows up again. And then I can put another one and it shows up again. I'm going to show you how we can make it so when we use a component multiple times, we can pass different properties to it. That'll be in the next video so that it looks different based on kind of the arguments that we give it. Anyways, for now, we'll leave just this kind of one info component like this. And there you go. You have now created your first React component. Now what I'm going to do is make another component, and this component will kind of make like maybe an input field or something. So we'll say function, and we'll say maybe add item, whatever. You can call them whatever you want, obviously. And from here, what I'm going to do is return an input field. So I will return a div. And then inside of this div, what I'm going to do is make an input. I'm going to say type equals, and this will be button, or actually let's make it text. And I think that's pretty much all we really need for that. And then what we can do is, what is it saying here? Oh, sorry, the input tag doesn't have an ending tag. It just ends like that. And then is there a value? We can give it a default value, or we can give it, so actually what I'm going to do here is change this div to be a form. So let's make this a form instead so I can use my label tag. So let's remove form. Let's now give this an ID. Let's say ID is equal to, I don't know, input, or input's probably not going to be a good thing to make it. Let's just make this text, text form. Okay. And then we can do a label. So I'll say label for equals, and then a text hyphen form. And then inside of here, we will say type something like that. All right, so now we have created our add item component. Now I'm going to use that inside of my app. So now after info, I'm going to say add item like that. Now actually, let's just end it this way. And now notice we have our type something. We can type something in here. That's all working. And if I wanted to use this multiple times, well, I could do that, right? And there you go. Now, if we wait, we should see that we have 3 input fields popping up that all say type something. Then, of course, inside of our components, we could render other components. So inside of our add item, what we could do is maybe we could render the info component, right? So we could say info like that. Then if we run this, notice that every single time that we generate an add item component, it's going to also render an info component, and so that's showing up afterwards. All right, so now that we've seen how to render the add item 3 times onto the screen, we've looked at some basics of components. I'm going to talk to you about JSX. Now, JSX stands for JavaScript XML, and there's a few different things that you can do with it, but the most valuable is being able to evaluate JavaScript expressions right inside of your kind of output HTML here. This makes it really, really useful to generate dynamic pages, especially if you have a ton of data that you want to render. Obviously, you don't want to manually write all of that out. You're going to want to write some code that can do it more efficiently for you. And so I'm going to go inside of my info component here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a variable. So I'm going to say const, and we'll just make this maybe title. I'll set this equal to this is my title. Okay, like that. Now I want to show the value of this variable inside of my HTML here. How do I do that? Well, you might be tempted just to write something like title, right? And you might think that that's going to work. But when I do that, you see that it just shows me the actual string title. If I wanted to show the value of this variable, not just the string title, what I would do is surround this in single curly braces. So when I do this, notice now it's showing me this is my title, because when I've surrounded in curly braces, it tells React, hey, this is a variable, or this is an expression of some sort. So you need to evaluate it and then display whatever the evaluation is. And so in the same way, I can take title and I can put that inside of my h1 tag here. And now you're going to see that it says this is my title. Now we can use some other cool things as well. I can make another variable here, and I can say const show underscore or show title is equal to, and then maybe we make this equal to false. And now maybe we're only going to show the title, and I'm typing in Python right now, it needs to be lowercase. We're only going to show the title if show title is equal to true. Now what I can do is I could say, all right, show title question mark title, otherwise nothing. Now, if I do this, notice that when show title is equal to false, nothing's showing up. But if I make this equal to true, then you're going to see that if I type true with a lowercase, I'm so used to the uppercase, it shows my title. So this right here is what's known as a ternary expression. Actually, I believe that's what it's called. I always butcher the name. Someone can correct me in the comments if I'm mispronouncing that. But what this allows you to do is write a condition, and then you put question mark, and this says, okay, I'm going to check if this is true. If this is true, do this. Otherwise, do this. And so we're evaluating this expression, and what we see is that we're going to get title whenever this is true, and we're going to get an empty string whenever this is false. Now I could change this to say no title, and then if I make this to false, you see that it goes to no title. So just an example of something interesting that you can do inside of JSX. Now, sometimes you actually want to return completely different stuff based on the value of a variable or based on some condition. In that case, you could do an if statement inside of this function, right? And I can say if, and this isn't JSX, this is just vanilla JavaScript, but I can say if show title, then I'm going to do this, and maybe we'll just go here and say title. Otherwise, though, what I'm going to do is return something else. And maybe I'm just going to return a p tag and say, you know, empty. Okay, so now if I do this and I save, notice it's showing me empty because show title is false. But if I change show title to true, then it's going to show me this is my title and manage your stuff. So just showing you kind of how you can dynamically render different things here. You can use these single curly braces to embed an expression, and the expression can be like whatever you want, right? Like I could do something like, let's go inside of here and go 2 plus 4. If I do 2 plus 4, notice we're going to get 6, right? So we'll evaluate the expression, and you also can do stuff like map, filter. You can use all kinds of different JavaScript functions inside of here, and we'll see more and more of this as we go through this tutorial, but that is the basics of kind of embedding variables or values inside of your output HTML here. So we will continue in 1 second, but I need to quickly thank the sponsor of this video and this series, which is Algo Expert. As you know, Algo Expert is the best platform to use when preparing for your software engineering coding interviews. I actually work at Algo Expert as an algorithms instructor, and you can find right now about 45 to 50 questions that were created by me on the platform. Check them out from the link in the description and use the code TechWithTim for a discount on the Algo Expert platform. Now, another thing to note here is how you use this kind of syntax, I guess, when you want this to be an argument to one of your components or one of the kind of HTML tags. So for example, maybe we want the for, or maybe we want something related to, let's go for input and let's say value. Maybe we want this to be equal to a variable we have. Maybe we have const value is equal to default or something like that, and we want the value of this variable to be the value of this input box. Well, in this case, what you would do is the same thing. You would just say value is equal to, and then inside of these curly braces, you would put value. And now notice it's going to be equal to default. If I change this and I say Tim is great, and we save, notice it's going to give us Tim is great now for the value. So just another way that you can do that, you can use the curly braces here. Okay, so I think that was probably a good introduction to components and JSX syntax. So using these kind of individual curly braces here and how it evaluates the expression. The last thing I'm going to show you here is how we can create a class-based component and how we can put these into different files, because oftentimes we want to do that. So in fact, what I'm going to do is copy this info component right here. You can notice we'll get an error right now because we're trying to use info and, well, it's not defined. What I'm going to do, though, is put it inside of its own file. So I'm going to go to src, going to make a new file, going to call it info.js. And then inside of here, I'm just going to paste this. Now, what I'm going to try to do is import this info function here from app.js. Now, what you would do normally is you would say import, and then you do the name of the component you want to import, so info, and then from, and then /, and then info.js. The reason you're doing / is you're defining a relative path. What that means is you're saying, okay, relative from where I am currently, I want to look for info.js. If you wanted to look in the public folder, then you would have to type in obviously a different path than just / info.js. Regardless, you can see this isn't working. It's saying attempting to import /info.js does not contain default export. And the reason for that is that when you are trying to import something from a function, it must be exported. So what you can say here is right on the same line as the function, export default function info. And now this should work. Notice that everything is all good because we're exporting this function, which means it's now allowed to be imported from here. Now, if I didn't export this with default and I just said export, what this will mean is I now need to surround info in these kind of curly parentheses here, curly brackets. And the reason for that, this should work now. What's going on here? Unexpected token, comma. Okay, so I don't know why I was getting that error. I just refreshed and everything's working now. But regardless, you can see that when I don't export this as the default export, I need to surround it in parentheses or in these curly braces. So when you export it default, what that means is you can import it without these curly braces. But when you do not export it default, you just export it. That means that you then need to surround it in these things right here. And you can only have one default export. So you say export default. This is the default thing being exported, but you can have as many other things being exported that are not the default, if that makes sense. So anyways, we'll leave it as export default. But what you can actually do is rather than writing it on the same line, if you want to clean this up, you can say export default and then info like that. And now the same thing should work. If we go over here and we run failed to compile, cannot import. Oh, that's because we still have it in the curly braces. Let's remove the curly braces. Now you can see that this is, if I refresh here, still working. Awesome. So that is good. And here you can see we were exporting default app. That's the reason why from index.js, we could just import app. If it wasn't the default export, we would need to surround it in our curly braces. Okay, so that is how you put stuff in different files. It's usually a good idea to put your components in different files just to keep things nice and clean, although sometimes you might have some small components in the same file and you export all of them out. Okay, so now the last thing I'm going to show us is just how we can actually convert this info component that is a functional component to a class-based component. Won't take us very long. I just want to show you what a class-based component looks like. So what I'm going to do is say class, and I will name this info, and then this is going to extend react.component. Now, since we're extending React, what we need to do is import React. So we're going to say import React from, and then this is going to be in all lower cases, React. Make sure you don't import it from React DOM. If you do that, you're going to get an error. You want to import it just from React. Now, this is the default export, and so that means we can import it this way. If it wasn't, we would need to surround it in our kind of curly braces. Anyways, now this should be working. What I'm going to do is define a render method. And inside of this render method, you are going to write what you want to be returned to render on the screen. So by default, the return statement from a functional component is just kind of this render method. Whereas when you create a class, you need to define manually the render method. And so I'm going to copy this right here and paste it inside of there. And I'll just delete it from inside of here so we know that we've already got that. Now what I'm going to do is save. You can see my stuff's auto formatting. I'm going to show you in 1 second how you can set up the auto formatter if yours isn't doing that. And then what I'm going to do is just copy my 2 variables here. So const title and const show title. And I'm just going to paste them for now inside of this render method. We could put them as class variables if we wanted to, but for now it's fine. We'll just put them inside of render. Then what I'm going to do is delete this. So delete info, save, and you should see that now everything is working the way that it was before. So all I've done is just now made a class-based component. You can see that it works the exact same as a functional component, except we kind of have to write more. So we say class info extends react.component. We have to define a render method, and then it just is like a little bit different syntax. That's really the main differences between a functional and class-based component, just a little bit of a different syntax. There is some performance differences, but for our purposes, they're not really worth maybe talking about. If you're getting into, professional React development, then you can make the argument, which is better, functional or class-based components. I believe right now React is recommending using functional components unless you have a ton of state in which they are saying you should use class-based components. Anyways, we'll talk about that later when we actually discuss state. But with that, that's going to wrap up the video. Okay, so I realized I totally forgot to show you guys with the auto formatter, so I'll do that quickly right now. There's an extension called Prettier. This is a really popular extension. It has 12.35 million downloads. Anyways, to find it, go to the extensions pane in VS Code, search Prettier, and install it. Now that should auto format the code for you. However, you may have to configure this. So what you can do is press Control-Shift-P. What this will do is open up the command palette. And then if you type format, you'll see format document with, you'll see file, save without formatting, all of these different options. And well, you can press format document with, and then for me, I have multiple formatters, but for you, you'll probably just have one. You can press Prettier, and then it will automatically format the document that you're on. Now, if you want it to format when you save, I believe that's a default behavior, but you can go to the VS Code settings. So if you go to settings, and then I think you could probably look at format. And here you go. See, editor format on paste, format on save. You can check these boxes based on the behavior that you would like. Anyways, to let you guys figure that out, that is the auto formatter. Again, it's an extension called Prettier. And with that, that's going to end the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in another one.